Okay, so I've got the head built here on OC Fly's Gowie 200 with the BeastX. The 3G head is actually, I kind of enjoy putting together. The tolerances are nice and tight. Everything goes together very well. A couple of footnotes about some things I did on the Swashplate here. I've been doing some research about the setup since this is actually my first T-Rex 250 build. Regarding the Swashplate here, some people have been having trouble on step J. It's a step where you have to set up the Cyclic in such a way where it helps determine the speed of the throws for the servos. The idea is you have to get 6 degrees of aileron pitch here and make the light here turn blue for an optimal setup. Well, in order to get that to happen on this helicopter, the G3 or the 3G Swashplate, you got to rearrange the balls a little bit. In its stock form, the Swashplate comes with short balls on the outside arms here and balls with tiny spacers on the inside swash ring here. So the idea is you swap around some of the balls, and what I did was I put the balls that didn't have the spacer on the inner ring here for the links that go up and down the grips here. And then I also used long standoff balls here. They're normally the balls you would use for the servos, for the servo horns out here against the three mount points for the servos. I think it's just about 6 millimeters of a standoff or so. And then for the anti-rotation pin here, there isn't an option available, so what I did was I used the anti-rotation pin from an extra Gowie 200 swash that I had, and a couple of flybarless parts to make that happen so that this ball is spaced out the same. I'll be doing the servo horns. When I measure where I want the balls to be, they're about 10 millimeters. Reading on HeliFreak, it seems as if on this bird a 10 millimeter ball distance on the servos is also optimal. So we're going to see how that pans out when we do the setup here. A couple of things I wanted to talk about in the radio before we begin. Of course you set your Swashplate type up as one servo. The instruction manual already kind of covers that, so you're going to want to do that. One thing I wanted to show you here was another thing you can set when you're doing the system setup is the trim step. Normally with a flybarred helicopter you would adjust your trims digitally, with the digital trims, but the thing is, with a flybarless setup, you don't want to use any sort of trims at all, because it'll give the gyro fits. Kind of the same concept as if you put too much sub trim on your tail servo and the thing starts to drift. Well, the same kind of concept can happen to the Cyclic as well. So a little trick you can do in your radio, if your radio has this feature, is normally you can adjust your trims, right? If you set your trim step for aileron, elevator, and rudder down to 0, then the radio is actually incapable of changing the trim. So you can't accidentally bump the trim and kind of knock your system out of whack and maybe not realize that's what you did and have problems with the way the helicopter flies. But this is nice insurance for being able to do that. So let's go ahead and get into the setup here. And then we'll go through. I'll walk you through the BeastX setup here, step by step. And when you power it on, you'll see the BeastX will walk itself through a power on self test. You can see the lights kind of going a little batty there. This takes a few moments to do, so go ahead and let it sit. When it's ready, you'll see that LED will turn blue. It'll actually change depending on if you're in heading hold or rate mode. We'll get to that later in the parameter menus. But anyway, we'll walk through the steps. Step A, the mounting orientation. We want it blue for horizontal. You could go vertical if you want to, if you're going to go vertical. So I'll show you how to get into the setup here, and we'll start with that first step. It's pretty easy. You just hold the setup button. It'll do a fast blink and then go solid. When it's solid, you let go and you're in setup. On setup step A, this is how we tell it, is the gyro sitting this way or this way. Upside down or right side up doesn't matter, but is it horizontal or vertical? Blue is horizontal, red is vertical. We're doing blue, so we're going to set it at blue. And then just move on to the next step. Next step is this, where we're going to set up the frequency of the Swashplate servos. I did research, and the servos I'm using here, the 5065 MGs, the high-techs, I did research and I found that they are 200 Hertz servo. So I'll just cycle through the options until I get what I need. 200 Hertz in the BeastX is a solid blue light. So that sets my servo frequency right there. We're good. Now we'll go to the next one. Okay. The next one here, it talks about the tail servo center position, the pulse length. The default is 1520, and this servo that I'm using is 1520 as well. I believe the one we're using is the 5084 on the tail here. So we can just skip right over that step because it was already stock. The next step here is the tail servo frequency. I did research on this one, and I'm able to set this one at 333 Hertz. In the BeastX, that's blue flashing. So let's get that light to go flashing blue. There we go. And changing these options here, it's just a simple flick of the rudder stick, left or right. You can go either direction through the settings until you find the one you want. And when you're ready, just hit the set button to move to the next one. So I got blue flashing. We're good to go. Okay. Now this next step here is just setting the tail rotor endpoints. Same thing as you've always done on any other servo, and you know, in gyro setup. You just slowly slide the stick one way until you get to the end, and you wait. The light will start to flash, and you'll know you're done. It'll be red or blue depending on which direction you went first. It doesn't really matter. But once you get that, you go back the other way. Okay, and then you'll wait for it to flash again, and then you're done, and you know you're good. And when it's purple like that, that tells you the BeastX knows that it's done. Another side note about that, when I was moving that, I noticed that the direction of the tail servo was actually going the wrong way. So I'll just go in my reverse switch and reverse rudder. That's all there is to that. So let's move on to the next step here. This will be the tail sensor direction. This is just to tell it you know, which way to oppose the force. There's a little trick I wanted to show you regarding this. If you take your tail blade and point the top tail blade towards the head, whichever way you rotate the helicopter, this thing, whichever way this blade points is the direction it's going to move the nose. So if it's pointing this way, it tells you it's going to want to rotate the nose that way. You can see that this is oriented backwards. So if you go on the BeastX and you change it, red is in a normal direction, so I'll just flip it to blue, and now you'll see it's opposing correctly. You know, if I turn to the right, it wants to oppose to the left. If I turn to the left, it wants to oppose to the right. That's what we want it to do. So that's all there is for that step. And we'll move to the next one. Okay, this one here is a pretty simple setup here. Actually, this is where you'll set the mechanical setup. What it does is the BeastX sets everything, or all the servos, at their neutral point. So you don't have to fiddle around with messing with mid-stick on the transmitter or anything like that. This just gives you an opportunity to get your servo horns all squared away. I did get lucky with these ones. The servo horns, I was able to find 3 of them that gave me 90 degrees on the servo, and then I just built the link straight up from there. I actually used all stock measurements from the manual, the 3G head manual, and it put me right at a level swash plate, right at 0 pitch, and the whole 9 yards. So there wasn't really any fiddling around that I had to do there with regards to that. Now the other thing about this setup, this step G here, you can stay on this step as long as you need to so that you can get everything squared away. And the way it works is, if you can't get 90 degrees, you can just move to one of the servos and it'll tell you which one you're updating depending on what color. Like for instance, blue is my pitch servo, and then you basically, once you've done that, you move to which one you want to change, and then you move the elevator stick up and down to move the servo horn up and down until you get it to 90. This is the digital version of sub trim, in the BeastX. That's also why you don't use any sub trim in the transmitter. You want to make sure to have all zeros across the board in your sub trim. We talked about sub trim before and how it kind of fools the gyro and whatnot. So you want sub trim to look like this here, and the reason why is because of this step G that you're doing here. You do it all right in the BeastX. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step, because this is, I've got the helicopter set up mechanically the way it needs to be. Okay, now we're on step H. This is just basically telling the BeastX what kind of swash plate I've got. It's a 120-degree swash plate. That's the default in the BeastX, and red is the default 120 degrees, so we can just skip right over that one. Okay, now step I, this is where we tell the BeastX which direction to move the swash plate. You know, forward and backwards for elevator, left and right for aileron, and up and down for collective. The first thing you want to do is you want to just move your collective up and down and make sure all the servos move the same direction. If they don't, you can pick one of the combinations that they show here based on the color, and you don't have to fiddle around with direction reversing in the radio just yet. At this point, you just want all the servos to go the same way. Mine are already going the same way, so I'm not going to actually have to change that at all. I'm going to leave it at the purple, which is the default. Now, on this same step, the next thing you want to do is you want to check, is it moving the right direction? Well, for me, my collective, when I push full positive, it gives the servo negative, full negative, and vice versa. So it's the opposite. This is a step that kind of screwed around with me a little bit too when I first started out messing with this with regards to reversing servos and whatnot. You know, in your typical ECCPM setup, you have to reverse one servo at a time. Aileron, pitch, elevator, the servos are named. But with the one servo setup in the radio, each function has the name. So pitch has a function, elevator and aileron each have a function. So if you're going to be reversing that, it just reverses the function, and the BeastX takes care of telling the servos what to do in that case. So for me, I'm going to reverse my pitch, and now full positive on the stick gives me full servo. You know, the servo or the swash plate moves up and down, so that direction is good. So now I'm going to check elevator. I see elevator is backwards. When I push forward, the swash plate leans backwards, and so same deal here. Just going to reverse it. Now my elevator is working right. My aileron was already working right, so I don't have to mess with that at all, which is good. So now we've told the BeastX how I want my servos to move the swash plate, and all is good. It's doing what it's supposed to now. Okay, so we're done with step I. Now on to the infamous step J. We switch to step J. This step here is you're going to teach the BeastX the geometry of the cyclic pitch. Long story short, you want to try and get you line the blades up to the tail boomer, and you want to try and get, as you move the stick, you want to get the blades to give you 6 degrees of aileron, or 6 degrees of cyclic really, and also make this light turn blue for an optimal setup. You'll see there's a couple of phases. It'll go purple, then red, then to blue, and it's just telling you you're getting closer and closer to an optimal setup. So we're going to see if I can hit 6 degrees with the changes that I had mentioned before that I did to the swash plate. So we're going to see what we get when we do that. Let me just set my my pitch gauge here. And also another footnote, this is a perfect opportunity to get out the little gadget that comes with the head here, where you can run a flybar or some sort of other straight device through the head. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on really quick so I can mess around with pitches and whatnot. There we go. This is a pretty cool invention. I know Rick Lohr, he makes some of these kind of setup tools, locking tools for the heads, flybarless heads and stuff, available on Ready Heli. That's a great guy there doing that kind of stuff for all of us to make our setup simpler. So thanks Rick for that. So I'll just put this on here, get it, 90 to the head. I'm sure all of us have had to figure out how to do this at least once. But I'm just going to slide a fly bar through here, and then we can start the setup. This step J is also another step that you can stay on for as long as necessary until you get your head set up the way you want it. So if you can't get that blue at 6, don't fret, because you got plenty of time if you want to play around with the balls on the swash plate, or any of that kind of stuff, to try and get it to line up the way you want it. Because it'll stay here like this, and so if you wanted to, what you can do is you can tip it, and if it's not doing it right, you can take a ball off the one side that you have your grip on, or that you have your pitch gauge on, and try different balls here and there, and change this pitch and see if, right when I'm at blue, what can I do to the head to make this 6 degrees. So I'm just going to start by throwing this pitch gauge on here, and we're going to see what it's giving me here. 6 degrees. And the way you do it is you'll slowly move the aileron stick and watch the light to see where it goes as you watch your pitch, to see if you're going to be getting 6 degrees pitch or not. So let's go ahead and slide this on here. Alright. Now I'm going to slowly tip it. Go this way. And then we'll watch our light. See, right when I go to blue, on this particular setup here, when I do that, I actually have slightly more than 6 degrees of pitch. So it's not exactly optimal. With the hardware that I have here, I've got this head mechanically as far as I can get it at the moment. There's not much mechanically I can do to reduce that throw at this point. I might play around with it, get some new parts to see if I can do that. Maybe if I add really small spacers on this servo horn here, for instance, I may be able to do that. I don't want to bore you with watching me do that change here. I've got a couple of spacers that I'll try later, but if I did that, if I was to pull this ball off and move it out ever so slightly farther, then the pitch on this blade would slowly sink, and I could try and sink that pitch down so that this says 6 while this says blue. For right now, I'm going to leave it just at blue, and then we'll move on to the next step, just so I can show you the rest of the steps. I've seen some people leave it in just in the reddish, just right before blue like that. But for me, I'm going to leave it at blue. One thing too, if you've been playing around with it for too long and you're not sure, you can move the tail stick and just reset everything, and then slowly move it again until you get that blue that you're looking for. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next step after this. Okay. This part here, you're just going to tell the BeastX how much positive and negative pitch you're going to want to be able to use on the helicopter. Again, this is a pretty simple setup. You just, if you want, you can you set your pitch gauge to whatever pitch you want to be able to have, positive and negative. For me, I'm going to set this one up at 12. So I'll set my pitch gauge at 12. And then what I'll do is, the way you do it is, it's kind of like setting up endpoints on the tail. You move the stick all the way up to tell it, okay, this is where positive is going to be. And then what you do, as it's all the way up there, is you move the elevator, oh, I'm sorry, my apologies, you move the tail up, left or right to increase or decrease the pitch that you want to have until you get your desired amount here. Let's see, I said I wanted 12 degrees, so there's that. And then you do the same thing going down. So we'll go down to negative 12. There we go. I could maybe, mechanically I could get more than this, but on these small birds it's kind of easy to bog them out, and there's realistically no reason to have more than this much pitch on the helicopter. So let's go ahead and tweak this one to make sure we got it where we want it. Okay, good. So we just told the BeastX, this is what I want for full positive and negative collective. This next step here is with regards to this one is the Swashplate limit. This is kind of where you'll be able to set up how much cyclic throw you're going to have, and also create a swash ring so you can't actually move into the corners. Parts of the corners will be disabled, like as if you had a swash ring on your transmitter. Now, on a typical flybar setup, you would want to mechanically set it up to say 6 or 8 or however much you want to have. In here, that's not the same. You don't want to, just tell the BeastX, I only want to have 6 degrees or 8 degrees. You actually, on this step, you want to try and set it to as much possible mechanical throw you can get before you can bind, which typically is somewhere between 10 and 14 degrees. You're not actually going to use that much cyclic all the time. It just tells the BeastX how far could it move the cyclic if it wanted to do that. So the way you do it is very simple. You just move your aileron and your elevators over to the full extremes, and then while you're over there, you can move your tail stick here. And just like we saw in step J, you want it to go blue because that's optimal. And here's another tip about that is while you are blue, you want to be able to get the head to have at least 10 degrees or better of available cyclic. I like to try and hit more than that. And on my big bird, I set it at 12, and it's flying nicely. And on here, I'm going to do the same thing. So a little tip for how you can tell what you actually have for degrees when you do that is just like the old school way you set up a pitch. If you go and give yourself mid-stick, because you can sit at mid-stick on this particular step, then you can look and see what do you actually have set for that particular thing. So what we'll do is we'll first start with elevator, and we'll teach the BeastX how much maximum elevator we want. And like I said, I want 12. So I'll move my stick until I get my 12. And then what I'll do is, if it turns blue, that means mechanically this head is capable of doing that for me, and 12 degrees is something that I want it to be able to do. And the BeastX manual says that having at least that much, 10 to 12 degrees, is optimal for if you want to do a 3D type setup. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. And for aileron, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to see what we can get here. There we go. Alright, let's double check that here. Okay, there we go. And let's do one more double check on elevator. Move back around here. Okay. Yep, and I can still get smooth rotation of the head when I have a full aileron and elevator deflection. So that huge amount of cyclic, mechanically the head is able to do that, which is exactly what we want on this step. So let's go ahead and move on. That was step L. The next one here is to, we're going to teach the BeastX how to oppose movement. This is a pretty simple step. Basically, when you tip the heli forward, you want the swash plate to lean backwards to oppose that force. And when you go left and right, you want the swash plate to tip opposite of that as well. So pretty simple step. You just want to pick the helicopter up and lean it and see is the swash plate moving opposite of the way you're leaning it? And right now, when I look at this, currently, it's not. When I tip forward, the swash moves forward. When I tip to the left or to the right, the swash plate moves in the same direction. So we're going to want to change that. Right now we're in that blue where it says normal, normal. So we'll just try the next one. Red. And we'll see what we get. Elevator is still the opposite. Aileron is doing what it's supposed to do. I already know which one I want, but I figured I'd walk through them all so you can see. Purple. My elevator is doing what it's supposed to, but my aileron is the opposite. So we're going to set it to in the BeastX, which is reversed for me for this helicopter. Now when I tip the swash or the helicopter, the swash plate does everything it can to stay level. It's hard for you to see it on the camera here, but essentially the swash plate is trying to stay level to the earth, regardless of what the helicopter is doing. As long as the swash plate's doing that, then you know you've got the BeastX set up correctly. Okay, now we're going to move on to the last step. I think this is a pretty cool feature. This is the pyro compensation. This step is fairly straightforward as well. The BeastX will put the the swash plate in some orientation. It may be different depending on how your servos are or whatever. That doesn't matter. The point is, while the swash plate is tipped like that, what you want to do is you want to turn the helicopter. The idea, mine was pointing this way. The idea is you want that swash plate to keep pointing in the same direction regardless of which way the helicopter is oriented. Right now when I do this, I can see that my swash plate's not doing that. It's kind of doing the opposite of that. So the swash plate's kind of doing this kind of a thing as I spin the heli. So I'm just going to go ahead and reverse that setting. Just switch it to blue. And now when I turn the helicopter, no matter which way this heli's facing, that swash plate is staying dead on, oriented in the direction it started, which is perfect. That's exactly what you want. That's how the BeastX is able to let the helicopter rotate and move across the sky at the same time without giving you fits. And once we've got that, we can go ahead and push that set button for the last time, and we're done. The BeastX is now initialized and ready for flight. I'll go ahead and do a few test flights, and then we may come back and talk about the parameter menus and some of the things you can do there. Footnote about that, there's a HeliFreak user, NWM Tech. He created a really nice thread in the BeastX forums are on HeliFreak called the Micro Beast Tuning Guide. I actually printed it out. I keep this with me when I'm out flying on my 550 and now with this one as well. Great tips about a good order for how to set up your tail and get it dialed in so it's not wagging and so it rotates the same way either direction and while you're moving, and all of that is in here. It also goes through head tuning as well to try and dial out any sort of porpoising or unusual effects that might be going on. I know on my 550 right out of the box it was for the most part doing exactly what I needed it to do, so I haven't really had to dig too deep into this with my 550, but it's nice to know it's there. So thanks NWM Tech for putting that together. That's it for the setup on the BeastX. Thanks for watching.